would like to call on Mr. Brian Boudet at this time, and it looks like Jacques Cologne has joined him.
Thank you very much, Mayor. As you said, I'm Brian Boudet with the city's Planning and Development Services Department, and really a pleasure to be here again in front of you to talk about the Home in Tacoma project. As you know, what you have before you today is first reading on the adopting ordinance for phase 1 of the Home in Tacoma project. Included in that package, as mentioned, was policy change, a significant amount of policy changes in our comprehensive plan, particularly associated with our housing growth strategy, as well as a number of near-term code changes and the recognition of a housing action plan. If adopted, that ordinance will then send us into a phase 2 project that will extend over probably the next year and a half or so. Before I go in and summarize some of the components of the ordinance, I do want to make sure to address the question that often comes up about this project and concern about whether or not it's really part of a broader package, that this specific proposal, while it looks at zoning and our comprehensive plan, does not in and of itself address the city's broad and multifaceted affordable housing and other housing challenges. So I think it's important to say that this project and this ordinance, is not something that has been put together in isolation. This is part of a much broader package. And to that end, it's why today we have, as you mentioned, Mayor Jacques Cologne, our 2025 strategic manager, here as well, just to talk really quickly a little bit about how this really fits in to our overall affordable housing action strategy. So Jacques.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. As Brian said, this really starts with a broader umbrella, and that starts with Tacoma 2025. And recognizing that one of your council priorities has been affordable housing, and that priority of affordable housing is derived from the Tacoma 2025 indicator that states that the community's vision is to have a decrease in the percentage of individuals who are spending more than 45% of their income on housing and transportation costs. And as you know, the AHAS, the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, is a direct response to addressing that council priority indicator and the housing crisis our community is in right now. One of the key objectives in the Affordable Housing Action Strategy is to create more units of housing with a goal of 6,000 new units this decade. And as Brian mentioned, we know that no single action can accomplish that goal, which is why there are actually 12 actions within just that objective 1 of creating more homes for more people. And as you can see, it includes the past ordinance that you all should be commended for, the 0.1% sales tax for both capital and supportive services for affordable housing. But that is in combination with other actions such as the multifamily tax exemption that you recently took action on, surplus land policies, permitting streamlining for affordable housing, offsite improvements, the Affordable Housing Fund, and so on and so forth. You can see on this slide that there are example actions within each of the 4 objectives in the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, and this is only a sampling of the actions. And really, they're here to make the point that Home in Tacoma is, again, one of many simultaneously occurring in parallel actions. And although Home in Tacoma might be the most significant action, all of these in combination address the many contributing factors to the housing crisis. So Home in Tacoma is certainly a crucial component of this overall package, creating the necessary conditions for meeting our housing goals through infill density. And finally, I just want to mention that Home in Tacoma, again, as Brian mentioned, is being planned in alignment and coordination with these other AHAS actions, such as expanding the multifamily tax exemption to mid-scale corridors, and in combination with the anti-racist transformation work that we're undergoing as a city, such as weaving that into the city's anti-displacement work, Home in Tacoma that is, to ensure that if passed, we can maximize the benefits and mitigate any negative impacts on community. So with that being said, I'll pass it back to Brian to get into more details about the policy in particular. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacques. Always good to keep that perspective on the overarching affordable housing action strategy. And that goes a little bit to the realities of how long this conversation has been going on. The council obviously adopted the Affordable Housing Action Strategy back in 2019. And since then, and even before then, there's been substantial work going on, both at the policy level and the implementation level on numerous strategies, and including our comprehensive plan and our zoning structures. So this project that you have before you, this ordinance, is the result of a significant amount of work on behalf of the Planning Commission, on behalf of the community, and on behalf of the Infrastructure Planning and Sustainability Committee. The ordinance that you have in front of you reflects that recommendation from the IPS committee that was provided here at the end of October. You will recall that you held a public hearing a couple of months ago back in July, received lots of comments and input on that, and in response decided to forward the Planning Commission's recommendation over to that council committee in order to dive deeper in and provide some recommendations back to try to address the broad concerns that had been brought up by the community. And then lastly, important, we obviously hear a lot about community engagement on this project, and there is no doubt that there have been numerous challenges based on the timing and the pandemic and things like that. At the same time, I think it's worth recognizing that there has been a massive amount of engagement and a massive amount of input. And on behalf of staff, I certainly want to express my appreciation for both the quantity and the quality of community input that has helped to get us to this point. You can see a number of examples on the right-hand side of the slide here of the kinds of outreach and engagement we got. And there is no doubt we are in the thousands of comments that we have received on this project. Probably, and I think it was alluded to earlier in the council meeting, certainly probably the most in any project that I can say that I was personally involved in, maybe over the last whole 20 years or so of my career. So the ordinance they have in front of you is, again, phase one. Always critical to remember that this is sort of the policy and vision phase, not the full implementation phase of the Home in Tacoma project. This component is designed to make a policy statement and really make progress at a vision level on increasing housing supply, housing choice, and housing affordability. And one of the most significant components of this proposal, as you see here, is a shift from a significant portion of our city being designated specifically and exclusively for single family development only, to a system that provides more flexibility in housing types in and throughout our residential neighborhoods. So one of the big components of the policy proposal in front of you is obviously the map that identifies where mid-scale housing would be allowed and where low-scale housing would be allowed. Again, this map reflects the IPS committee recommendation. This is one of the big components that the council, in providing your direction to the IPS committee, said, to make sure that the committee spent a lot of time really thinking about the extent and the focus for where mid-scale is most appropriate in this policy phase of the conversation. So in a very similar way to the Planning Commission, the committee really looked very closely at potentially focusing mid-scale areas around high capacity transit, around our designated corridors, tending to be larger streets where we also have transit, and corridors that are connecting centers, areas where there's services provided, as well as providing for transitions around services or mixed-use centers where residents would have the ability to access services that can help meet their daily needs within a close walking or biking distance. As you see here, and there's been a lot of discussion about the amount of mid-scale. You'll see on the slide, it mentions the 17.5% mid-scale. Really important to make comparison, I guess, to the Planning Commission's recommendation, which was, I believe it was about 38% mid-scale. So again, recognizing there was a lot of concern about the extent and the focus of the mid-scale, the IPS recommendation very much responds to that and significantly reduces the volume of mid-scale on this proposed map. It is also important to remember that even though there's been a lot of focus on the mid-scale, which are the sort of pink and orange areas on the map, that the yellow areas that are on the map, the rest of the residential designated areas in our comprehensive plan are also shifting to low scale. So that is also a notable and significant change in our policy direction. I'm not sure what happened to my PowerPoint there. Does anybody else, did that drop off for everybody else? I assume so.
Sorry, were you not done? Oh, there you go. Were you not done? There we go.
Something happened to my PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. I apologize. So I mentioned on the previous slide, the map is a significant portion of the policy direction. Again, the primary shift here from a growth strategy and housing vision perspective is moving away from the majority of the residential area in the city being focused and limited only to single family to these two types here, low scale and mid scale residential. So in both cases, those are more flexible than the current designations. The low scale is sort of generally in the single family, duplex, triplex sort of scale, co-housing, cottage housing, things like that. Generally housing types that would still be within the size and height of single family or traditional residential that we might see around in the surrounding areas. The mid-scale residential is the next step up that gets to what often folks have been calling the missing middle housing type. In addition to allowing those types of housing that would be allowed in the low scale, so still single family and duplex and things like that, it also adds on sort of small and mid-scale multifamily. That is in limited instances, and even in the IPS committee recommendation, there were some further limitations on that I will mention here in a minute. So it is critical, I think, also just to remember that while there has been a lot of focus on the map, and the map is a super critical component of the policy direction in this ordinance, it is certainly not the only component. Much of what we hear in the community, and validly so, are concerns about how exactly this more flexible housing type will be allowed in existing neighborhoods, and what are the sort of standards, what are the processes that will be put in place to help make sure that that new housing is reasonably compatible with existing neighborhoods. So the policy proposals that you have in front of you, in addition to the map, include pages and pages of new policy direction to really get to some of those issues, to make sure that as this project moves forward into phase 2, that before zoning is put in place based on that mid and low scale map, that the standards are put in place, the design and development standards that are really critical to ensuring the quality of development, mechanisms to try to incentivize affordability, mechanisms to try to reduce displacement and discourage demolitions, and the analysis and tools in place to help address infrastructure. So you see here a summary of some of those. One of the ones that I think is particularly important to point out, because the IPS committee strengthened a number of the policies associated with these items. In particular, height has been a huge concern. And so in addition to limiting the amount of mid-scale, the IPS committee also provided some additional pretty specific direction that 4 stories in that mid-scale area would be limited just to along corridors. So not in those areas that extend out into neighborhoods, not in the transitions around mixed use centers. Again, trying to address one of the really significant concerns that I know the council has definitely heard. In addition to these policy changes, just to note the final bullet on there, there are a number of near-term code amendments that are included in this package. Not nearly as significant in most ways as the overall policy approach, certainly, but items that can improve our standards associated with accessory dwelling units based on the experiences and where we've identified some challenges in the permitting, streamlining some of our platting procedures, some new affordability bonuses that are based on recent state law changes, and some additional flexibility for non-conforming uses that are in our residential neighborhoods. So with that, I'll just remind everyone that, again, this is the phase one that we're talking about. This is structured to say, here's a new policy vision for residential areas in the city, but those things do not get put in place. That zoning does not go in place until we have worked through phase two, worked through the details, addressed the design standards, addressed the infrastructure analysis, and many of those other concerns that we have very much heard. So there is very clear and now strengthened policy direction on all of those components. So with that, Mayor, I will close, and certainly we are open and available for questions or comments.